Hey everybody, I'm Jason Bittner from Triple Helix Corporation, and welcome to our Helix Insider podcast. Today I'm joined by special guests Pedro Lopes, one of our developers, and Andy Webster, one of our senior developers here at Triple Helix. And today we wanted to talk to you about when is a good time to look in getting a ERP system that is a enterprise resource planning software solution for your business. So in our world, we deal a lot with manufacturers, and these types of softwares, the ERP systems, are very, very common. But a lot of our manufacturing customers who have not yet implemented or obtained an ERP system, they get to a point in their business where all the information is in different systems in different places, and it becomes very apparent that they need to have a system that unifies all of the work they're doing. So for example, you could have what's called a customer relationship management or a CRM software where you store all your customer details. That can be in a separate system, but modern ERP systems now sort of bring those into one place. Similarly, in the finance side and your accounting side, maybe you're using a QuickBooks or a Peachtree accounting, and those software systems being separate, it makes it difficult to sort of get the big picture of the business. And moreover, if you're doing manufacturing and you have production, you have schedules, you maybe have inventory, all your materials. Typically, these customers and these companies use individual pieces like spreadsheets and separate systems to manage the company. And at some point, the volume of this information and all the different things that they're managing gets to be unmanageable. And so they look for a unified system to manage it, which is now what we call these ERP systems. There's many, many systems out there, but what we find is that at some point, a company recognizes they need to go after a unified system. Andy, why don't you give us a little bit of thoughts from your end on what constitutes a good time to look at bringing together a unified system?
Right. So, I mean, if you've got an ERP already and it's doing most of what you need to do, but not quite taking you there yet, and maybe you find yourself doing some workarounds in the ERP to try to make it do something that it's not really made to do, think about augmenting your ERP. And that's something that we do, where we typically build something that sits alongside it. I could think of one instance where a customer had a lot of manufacturing data, and they needed to figure out when each of these different jobs in their system need to be run. And so they need to slot them kind of in the order that, brings the information to your attention, so that you could say, okay, this job is really far behind and we need to do that one first. But without that kind of analysis of it, you don't really know. You're at that point, the ERP is great in that it has everything you need there and it stores it in one place, but it doesn't necessarily always take you all the way to where you know what to do with all that. So it's a big power tool.
The ERP system becomes the unified point of truth, correct? Like all of the information that you're working on has to go into one place as opposed to disparate places like spreadsheets and paper and whiteboards, correct?
Right. Instead of having to write everything down, if you had everything on a whiteboard for some instance, you could instead put that in electronically. And once you have something electronically, you can manipulate it in all kinds of different ways. It might look like something we typically build is alongside an ERP. It will be a web portal that'll have a number of reports on it. So you could kind of pull from your ERP and report based on the data that's already there. So you've got all the data. You've been using the CRP for a couple of years maybe, and then now that you've been collecting all that data, you can use it more effectively.
Well, I think to complement what Andy is saying too, is if a company finds themselves growing consistently and their spreadsheets are getting, for example, in the accounting department are getting really big and it's getting really cumbersome to share that with other departments, or for instance, they find themselves, having a lot of, whiteboards and writing things down and losing track of things. might be an indication that some of these things needs to be consolidated digitally into a system, and therefore creating a need for an ERP. And then the next question from that is where are the gaps, right? And so one thing that we do uh, as far as trying to find the gaps is the digital assessment, which is something that we Triple Helix developed, especially for the manufacturing industry. So basically, we sit down with the customer, we run through this assessment, which is a series of questions in different manufacturing fields, if you will. And we just run through the list, trying to find gaps and opportunities for to implement a solution. And at the end, we give our customers a report that tells them where they fall within the manufacturing industry and where the opportunities are. And in addition to that, we make a couple of comments as well, and suggestions or recommendations as to how to best implement those.
Yep. Yeah, so that digital assessment is actually a very powerful tool. It actually assesses competency in their digital space about all the different things they're doing. And it does address ERPs, but it actually goes a little further. It actually addresses different practice areas like their cybersecurity maturity, how well they're using their data related to, say, their customers, maybe their quality. And we do that as a free assessment. So if somebody was interested in saying, hey, how are we doing? Um, we run this for them and we let them see where they're at currently. And Pedro, talk to our viewers about how the assessment can actually show them the path where they should go, like the tiered level of our questions.
Right. So, off the top of my head, I can't remember necessarily like what each question is or the sections of it, but the assessment takes them through different portions of the manufacturing process, the business. And so from that point, it kind of gives them a score from 1 to 4 in each question, and it gives them an overall score for each section. And so based on that, we're able to identify where how well the company is doing, and in the future how well the company is doing in reference to the industry. I think that answers the question, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, I mean, a lot of our customers, when they go through the digital assessment, it's sort of telling them where they're at, but where they could be sort of like best in class. But at some point, they start to wonder, like, oh, okay, so what would I need for my company in terms of manufacturing and my competency to be better and actually improve things? And so, Triple Helix over the years has created something we call a phase zero assessment. And a phasor assessment is a gap analysis. It goes much, much deeper than this digital assessment. And what we like to do is we assess the company's practice areas in all areas of the company. So that could be the operations, administrations, sales, executive, quality, you name it. And it basically looks at all of the different things that a company is currently doing and what they're doing well, but more importantly, where the challenges are. And so said gap assessment allows us to create a roadmap or a plan of improving things. Sometimes that's a replacement of an ERP. Very often, companies that are actually not having an ERP, kind of where we started here, how do you know you're ready for one? It would be the ability to help them find an ERP, which is a very daunting task for companies who've never played with them. But in those situations where those companies already own an ERP, but they don't really get the full value out of it, and they may not be willing to get rid of it, what do they do? So this same gap assessment is actually provides the ability to get a roadmap of I'm here today, but I want to go over there tomorrow, and what are the steps to go there? Andy, talk to us about, like, now that you've run this phase zero, and now we're looking to make a recommendation on helping a company go from here to there. Let's talk about it in a way that those companies already have something tangibly invested in. Maybe an ERP is in-house. They're not happy with it, but they're not going to get rid of it. And yet they do need to do something differently because operations are being hindered by the current technologies. What would you recommend to a company that is in that situation, and how do we help them to go from here to there and in basically a very logical fashion?
Um, well, essentially, the phase zero, you're kind of getting a feel for what you have and what you need to get to. And the phase one is where we actually lay out a plan for what we're going to do. So typically, we'll um, go on site, get a good feel for your operation. Um, I can think of one right now where we did something for an a business with a production line, and they had all these different sensors at different points along the production line, and you kind of really need to be there for something like that. But and we get a good feel for where everything is physically, how your whole business heartbeat works, and then we set out a plan for the different steps to implement that. Really, I mean, typically, we'll need some of your data, like a sample, even a sample if there's um, technical stuff that, in any case, um, and we'll go from there. Typically, yeah,
How long does it typically take for us to build something like that? I mean, we don't do these monumentally large tasks, right? I mean, we try to micro chunk everything, right?
right, yeah. So for like a small task, it's typically it can take 3 months. It can be a larger task, could be a year maybe, to if you're really overhauling something. But if it's just something that's sitting on top of your existing system and augmenting it, then those are usually fairly small, and they don't touch your existing system at all. So you don't have to worry about that. They're the way we build things, we build it alongside so that it's reading from the databases, but it's not necessarily changing anything in the database. And the way we develop it, we always have a testing, staging kind of an area. So it's a sandbox. So as we go along at different points during the development, we will bring people in from your company who know those particular areas and can verify that things are correct as you would expect them to be in the different reports.
I think to complement what Andy is saying, it's important to note that almost 3 6 months or what have you, part a portion of that time is really just getting access to whatever databases we need to connect to work with, and really kind of interacting with the client that way to make sure that we have what we need to start building the solution, right? And then obviously, going ahead and doing the work. And um, it's very important that all the work that we do, it's just like Andy said, it's a sidestep on what's currently being used. For example, we have a client right now who we are building, different reports. They're looking at their data, and they're trying to look at a different way. So they asked us to build a couple different reports, and we did so without disrupting, the workflow. Just adding value and to the existing workflow. And so we developed all that on a test environment. Had them verify the data and then approve it, and then we push to production without any disruption to their activities. So
That's a really important point you bring up, because when we do these things, it's intended not to like affect the day-to-day operations. So we sort of, in your example, like use things in a test or a development environment, but everything is non-invasive, non-disruptive, correct?
Right. Even the database access that we typically get, it's usually read only, and we pull this data into the application or the report or or where have you, and we organize the data to best create the solution. But typically, we're not writing back to the database or altering the data in any way. We're simply reorganizing the data in a way that fits the task or solves a problem.
That's a good point, Andy. If we did have to write back to the database, how do we do that?
The best way to do it is if there is an API that works with your EIP.
What's an API?
Oh, sorry. Yes, application programming interface. That's kind of like it's a step between. So if you're directly connecting to your database, your ERP is built in a certain way so that one part of it changes and the other part's supposed to change. But that might not always be on the database level. So if you go through the API, then all of the correct stuff will happen. Like say, if I change, say if I have an invoice and I change a line of it in the database directly, it might, and then on the top level of the invoice they have the total of how much each line costs. Um, you might if you don't go through the API, that might not flow upwards. So little things like that it's but in in some cases if we need to write directly to it, we can directly connect um, as well.
But we prefer to use the API because it protects the data environment, correct?
Right.
No, good. No, that's very important. So kind of just to recap, so we started our conversation here about how does a company know when they're ready for something better. We get rid of spreadsheets and paper and whiteboards and stuff. It becomes apparent to the business that they need something better. For manufacturers, who we deal a lot with, an ERP system, that enterprise resource planning software, becomes very important. We then decide, well, how do you know what you're going to need from a technology standpoint, even outside of the ERP? And that's what you said earlier, Pedro, is our manufacturing digital assessment allows us to gauge a company's maturity level so they know where they're at and what they might need. And then they graduate to a phase zero. That the phase zero allows them to understand where those gaps are and where the opportunities are. That if they're buying a new ERP, a phase zero ERP assessment would tell them how to buy a new ERP, or a more traditional assessment would just give them the knowledge to how to augment what they have so that it's A, non-invasive, B, cost-effective, and C, can get done in a timely manner. To your point, Andy, with the modular development that we do, these phase ones are small and micronized to the effect of that you get meaningful improvements in a reasonable amount of time. Pedro, any final thoughts on that process we just laid out?
No, I think you outlined it perfectly. It's essentially what you said. Digital assessments introduction, if you will, just to gauge some opportunities and situate where you are. And then phase zero is a more in-depth look in maybe taking some action. And then from that point, it's either developing something completely custom or adding to an existing solution that you already have implemented, but always keeping in mind that without any disruption to your current workflow or whatnot. So I think that outlines perfectly. And obviously, if anybody finds themselves in a state where they don't know where they are, or they're kind of situated in those examples that we mentioned, they're always welcome to reach out and take the digital assessment and start that process so we can help them out.
And that digital assessment's free, right?
It's absolutely free. It's something that we do to help people within the industry, and also be able to develop a relationship and find opportunities for them to implement. So
Excellent. Andy, final thoughts?
Yeah, just do it sooner than later, because the longer you sit in a disorganized state, the more you know the more time you're wasting, and the more efficient your business is, the better you can function, and the healthier it'll be. So
Right. I mean, this is a good point, Andy. And just that affects your bottom line. As your business is growing or running, the more efficient and organized it can be, will end up saving you money in the long run. And so, taking action today is paramount to making sure that you're allow your business to go properly and making sure that the bottom line is safe.
Right. So, final thoughts is, if anyone out there is looking for manufacturing digital assessment, please feel free to contact us. This podcast is actually loaded on our website, so you can get our contact information that way. We'd be happy to run a digital assessment for you, kind of give you an idea where you're at and where you might go. And if it looks like it might be beneficial, we would recommend a phase zero assessment. It's a much deeper dive, but it provides a lot more insight as to how the business is doing and where the opportunities are. And we would be very happy to run that for you. So I want to thank my guests here again, Pedro and Andy. Thank you for your time today, and I appreciate the insights you offered. Thank you.